if you buy a 1 terabyte drive, you are only getting 930 gigs. That's a 7% drop from day one. There's nothing you can do about it, and it's completely legal. Next, remember I talked about RAID briefly, and I didn't want to inundate you with numbers. RAID 5 can take up X amount of space to make sure you don't lose your data. Right? That could be anywhere from 25% of your storage space all the way down to 4 or 5, depending on how many drives. So for sake of math and averages, I picked 15. But that could be upwards of 25. Right? So that's another 15%. Now we're at 790 gigs. Right? That's a loss of 21%. All of you are familiar with best performance buffer, right? You fill a drive past 80%, no bueno. Not so good, performance dies. So with that, you have now lost, and this is probably too long of an animation here, or I probably have to hit start. That probably helps. So you have your 930 gigs, you have your RAID 5 formatting, you have your best performance buffer, you now only have 63% of your storage space. Right? Now you're probably saying, well, Michael, I don't have a RAID, I just have a standalone drive. That's fine. You're still losing 71. You're still losing your 20%, and then your 7%, and your 20% of the remaining 93% for best performance. Right? So this is when I have speak with clients, and they say, well, production's only going to shoot 20 terabytes, so I can probably get away with a 24 terabyte. No, that 24 terabyte, you're probably closer to 60% of that. Right? So this is why you also have to overestimate. There's a drink. That's what daddy drinks when you cry, right? Sometimes I put some alcohol in that. But what happens is when you take that amount and you pour it into a bigger glass, you're not getting any more quality, period. You take an 8-bit codec, you bump it up to a 10-bit codec, still 8 bits of quality in a 10-bit wrapper. That's it. It's empty, right? So don't do it. If you're doing it because you think it'll give you better quality, it will not. Cameras that were made using the Rec. 709 standard, which has been a standard for 27 years now, right? That was only meant to have a certain amount of dynamic range. So the concept of log was invented to say, how can we get more color and more information out of this range, right? So we're using more range, we're still getting the same amount of color in the same amount of dynamic range. Here's another way of looking at it. Here's a beautiful picture of the ocean, right? How often have you taken a picture and this ends up happening, right? It gets blown out. That's because there's not enough dynamic range on the camera. So what happens is when you're using log is that it shoots it in a way that retains all that information, but it's still using the same amount of dynamic range within that camera's sensor, all right? But here's where it gets confusing. Is that with HDR, you can shoot log in HDR. So you can get more color with it in HDR space. But the reverse isn't true. Does that make sense to everybody? If you can see these scopes, and I doubt you can because I can't, but if you were to look at log on a scope, you would see that those of you who have done color, traditionally are coloring between 0 and 100, right, for standard Rec. 709, 100, 110, 120. If you look carefully, you'll see that log, both on the bottom and the bottom right and the top, whether it's in HDR or not, you're still taking up the same amount of dynamic range. I'd also point out, this is more from an aesthetic standpoint, that if you're going to shoot log, please go out and test first. Test your workflow. Get the camera a day early, 2 days early, month early, shoot stuff, then go back. Play with it in Resolve, play with it in Media Composer, play with it in Premiere, Final Cut 10, play with it in Windows Movie Maker. Give it a shot and make sure your workflow works, because the worst thing you can do is shoot log and then not know how to use it. There's a guy who recorded himself talking on a webcam and then uploaded it to YouTube and then downloaded the file and then uploaded it and downloaded it and just kept doing that. And you can see through all the iterations the breakdown of the video because YouTube crunches it. So if you want to try and avoid banding, right? Everyone knows what banding is, right? You want to avoid that banding and try and keep those gradients? Dude, deal with the upload. Deal with the upload. When you upload a file to YouTube, I don't care if you're using a preset that Adobe or Apple gave you and they blessed it and it's got a halo on it. No. YouTube will always recompress it to their format for easier streaming. Some changes would be, well, you're like me and you have fat fingers, and you have fat finger the lower third. You type someone's name wrong. Oh, man. Or maybe the audio guy says, you know what, I messed something up, or I have another mix for you, right? Maybe they did a mix for the web, maybe they did a mix for television, and now you'd have to go back in, put it in your timeline, and hit export, and then wait through that export. That's not the case, because in most cases, audio and video are not muxed, meaning they're not intertwined. You can separate them and change one, but not the other. So this is a cool trick that's been around for years. QuickTime Pro. You can actually replace the audio. In QuickTime Pro, you open up the video, you open up your properties, you can select the audio track in the properties and just hit delete. Won't change anything yet. You then open up the new audio mix, you then copy it, you then go back to your original file inside QuickTime Pro, you paste it, you hit Save As. Done. Done. You now have something, a new file that's not recompressed with a different audio stream. No need to put that in your timeline and re-export. Take a look at 5 things, share it on social media, subscribe on YouTube. That would make me very happy. Thank you very much.